If you ever find yourself in the ruins of Chaktich Castle, come at night, stand in the eastern tower, close your eyes, and listen, not for the wind, not for the wolves, but for the faintest echo of something far more chilling, the screams. Screams that were swallowed by these stone walls over 400 years ago. Yet on certain nights, when the air is still and cold, they return. Historians call her a noblewoman. Locals call her a demon. She was Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess. A woman of wealth, power, and unimaginable cruelty. In the bowels of this castle, she built a kingdom of silence and blood. Young girls were brought in under promises of work and safety. They never left. Some were burned, some were beaten, some were drained, slowly, methodically, so that their blood could fill her bath, because Elizabeth Bathory believed that fresh, warm blood was the key to eternal youth, and no price was too high, not even hundreds of innocent lives. This isn't a horror story, this isn't a vampire myth, this is documented history. She kept diaries, she had a team, she had rituals, and for years she was untouchable, protected by her noble status and the fear she instilled in everyone around her. Until the day she made one mistake. She chose the wrong victim, and the world finally turned its gaze on the woman who bathed in blood. But by then, over 300 girls had already disappeared. This is not just a story about a killer. It's about power, vanity, and the darkness that grows when no one dares to look. This is the true story of the Blood Countess. Part 1. Twisted Roots, the childhood of a monster. To the world, she was a countess. To her victims, she was a nightmare in human form. But Elizabeth Bathory wasn't born a monster. She was raised to be one. Hungary, 1560. The land was bleeding. Caught between the crumbling Holy Roman Empire in the west and the rising Ottoman forces in the east, 16th century Hungary was a land of violence, superstition, and fear. And in a crumbling stone manor high in the Carpathian hills, a baby girl was born into a legacy of blood. Her name, Elizabeth Bathory. Her title, Countess of Exed. Her bloodline, one of the oldest and most powerful in Eastern Europe, the Bathory curse. From the outside, the Bathory family were heroes. They had fought dragons in myth, hunted vampires in folklore, and ruled lands as vast as small kingdoms. But behind closed doors, the legacy was far darker. Her uncle Stephen was known to sew the mouths of prisoners shut and throw them into frozen rivers. Her aunt Clara was rumored to practice black magic, invoking pagan rituals passed down from witches burned in earlier generations. Her cousins displayed signs of madness, hallucinations, violent outbursts, and obsession with death. In the name of noble purity, the Bathorys married within the family. Inbreeding concentrated not just wealth, but madness. Elizabeth never stood a chance, a beautiful child with cold eyes. As a child, Elizabeth was strikingly beautiful, porcelain skin, raven black hair, lips like stained rose petals. She was educated by private tutors, fluent in Latin, German, Hungarian, and Greek by the time she was 10. She debated politics, quoted philosophers, and practiced court etiquette with royal precision. But beneath the surface, something darker brewed. She had a habit of dissecting animals, not out of curiosity, but to see how long they could suffer. She was caught once stabbing a servant with a sewing needle because the girl laughed too loudly. Her family didn't punish her. They laughed. They called her spirited. Violence wasn't discouraged, it was expected. Age 11, the first death one cold winter afternoon, Elizabeth stood at the window of her family estate. Below in the courtyard, a peasant was tied naked to a post. His crime, stealing bread. The punishment, death by exposure. No sword, no rope, just ice and time. Elizabeth watched as the man's skin turned blue, then purple, then black. She asked no questions. She didn't flinch. She simply observed like a scientist. That night, she told a servant he cried for hours, and then he stopped. It was beautiful. That was the moment she understood power, not as a crown, not as a title, but as the ability to take a life, slowly, while doing nothing, while smiling. The marriage that lit the spark. At age 15, Elizabeth was married to Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a warrior known as the Black Knight of Hungary. Ferenc was no innocent man. He had flayed Ottoman prisoners alive. He decorated his battlefield camp with impaled heads. To many, Elizabeth's marriage was political. To her, it was liberation. Ferenc taught her more than diplomacy. He taught her torture. While he was away at war, he sent her souvenirs, spiked whips, branding irons, a glove lined with claws. Their love language was cruelty. Their honeymoon took place not in a palace, but in a dungeon. Together they experimented, holding girls upside down by their ankles until they passed out, stabbing them with hot pins, cutting them in exact patterns, not to kill, but to bleed. Elizabeth discovered something in those moments, a hunger, a thrill, a joy nothing else could match. Not wealth, not marriage, not court life. Only screams filled the void inside her. A monster still becoming. In these early years, the killings were hidden. A servant girl who dropped a goblet. She ran away. A stable boy who mouthed off. Trampled by a horse. But every death sharpened Elizabeth's taste for control. And when Ferenc died suddenly in 1604, leaving her a widow with vast lands and no oversight, the real horror began. Part 2, the blood ritual begins. Obsession with eternal youth. The moment that changed history. It started not with a scream, but with a slip of the hand. A servant girl, no more than 16, brushed the Countess's long, dark hair. A snarl in the strand, a sharp pull, and the girl gasped. So did Elizabeth. But only one of them survived the moment. The Countess turned, slapped the girl so hard that her ruby ring tore flesh, and watched as blood splattered across her own pale skin. She wiped it away, annoyed, then paused. She swore. The skin beneath the smear looked smoother, tighter, youthful. It might have been an illusion. But Elizabeth Bathory didn't care about reality. She cared about results. The first bloodbath. That night, she ordered something that horrified even her most loyal servant. "I don't want water. I want her." They bled the girl into a basin. Elizabeth stepped in, slowly. The hot blood clung to her skin. Steam rose in the cold dungeon air. She closed her eyes, let it soak into every pore, and in that moment, she believed herself reborn. Superstition, science, and self-delusion. The 17th century blurred the line between medicine and magic. Elizabeth had long studied herbal cures and folk potions under the guidance of her aunt, rumored to be a practitioner of witchcraft. She'd seen nobles take powdered unicorn horn for virility. Alchemists drink mercury to achieve immortality. So why not blood? In her world, this wasn't madness, it was medicine. And with each bath, she was convinced she looked younger. Servants agreed, or were forced to. She demanded reports. "Do I look 35 today?" They said yes, because to say no was death. From ritual to routine. At first, she selected girls who had misbehaved, burned bread, laughed too loud, dropped a goblet. Each mistake became a justification, a reason to kill, but soon mistakes were invented. And when that wasn't enough, innocence itself became a crime. Elizabeth began building a chamber designed for blood collection. Sloped floors, stone drainage, chains hanging from the ceiling, hooks for inversion, silver tubs to capture blood still pulsing with warmth. A slaughterhouse masquerading as a bathhouse. Developing her philosophy of blood. She believed terror made blood stronger. Virginity preserved its youth-giving essence. Beauty in the victim transferred beauty to the killer. She began testing. Girls were beaten until they screamed, then killed. Others were tortured slowly, over days, to purify their blood. Elizabeth recorded her findings in a leather-bound diary titled On the Preservation of the Body Through Blood. She wrote in Latin, meticulously, the inner circle. She could not do this alone, so she recruited. 4 became her hands and eyes: Dorothea Sentes, Dorca, midwife, herbalist, torturer. Created elixirs using blood, animal fat, and powdered bone. Ilona Joe, chambermaid, manipulator. Lured victims from villages with false job offers. Janos Uivari, Fichko, court dwarf, executioner. Delighted in dismemberment, his loyalty was rewarded with meat and gold. Katalin Benetsky, laundress turned corpse handler. washed blood from Elizabeth's clothes, and rinsed guilt from her own. They operated like a machine: identify, lure, bleed, dispose, repeat. Chachtis Castle, the slaughter palace. By 1606, Chachtis Castle was no longer a fortress. It was a death engine. The architecture shifted, walls thickened to muffle screams, windows sealed to hide shadows, new rooms constructed for body management. Rooms had names: the Red Room, draining chamber; the White Room, post-mortem preparation; the Silent Hall, soundproofed and isolated; and the smell, a mix of iron, rot, and lavender oil, never left the air. Elizabeth burned incense constantly, but blood has a scent that cannot be hidden. A perfect mask outside, she was still a countess. She hosted noble guests, attended mass, paid tribute to the king. She smiled, performed etiquette, flirted at feasts. Meanwhile, in the cellars below her feet, girls screamed and died. It was a split reality, a dual life. But the mirror in her chamber told only one story: that she was still young, still beautiful, still in control, and that mirror was all she cared about. The numbers begin to rise at first: a girl every few months, then every few weeks, then two in a single day. Elizabeth began demanding higher quality blood. Peasant girls were no longer enough. She wanted girls from minor noble families. Why? She believed blue blood was more potent. This change, this greed, would be her undoing. But not yet. The Countess descends into obsession. She stopped eating regular meals, claimed that food aged her, began drinking blood mixed with wine, had her servants collect menstrual blood for purity tonics, injected warm blood into her veins with crude instruments. Her diary shows a final chilling entry: time retreats. The mirror smiles. The blood is the truth. She didn't just want youth, she wanted eternity. And in her castle, where no one dared say no, she believed she had found it. Part 3. Empire of Silence. 650 dead, and no one dared speak. A kingdom built on fear. Between 1604 and 1610, Elizabeth Bathory built something far more terrifying than a haunted castle. She built a system, a living mechanism of death. It operated not with the clatter of machines, but with the silence of complicity. There were no alarms, no protests, no revolts. Just one thing, repeated over and over: a girl enters the castle. She never leaves, and no one asks why. Because in this world, questions got you killed. The murder machine. Elizabeth's killings evolved from acts of sadism into an industrial process. Each murder was no longer a crime. It was a procedure. Victim identified, transport arranged. Blood extracted, body disposed. Everything was compartmentalized. Everyone had a role. Nothing was random anymore. Her inner circle became her staff. Ilona Joe, recruiter and manipulator, the bait for unsuspecting girls. Dorothea Sentes, the torturer, the artist of pain. Janos Uivari, her executioner, loyal, cruel, precise. Katalin Benetsky, the cleaner, the one who erased the evidence, buried the bones. They weren't followers. They were cogs in a machine. And Elizabeth? She was the architect, the engine, the conductor of horror. Why no one stopped her? You may ask, how could this go on for 6 years? How could hundreds vanish and no one intervene? Because every system of cruelty needs two things to thrive: absolute power and absolute silence. Elizabeth had both. First, legal immunity. As a countess of royal blood, she was virtually untouchable. In 17th century Hungary, nobility wasn't just social status, it was legal armor. She could beat, imprison, or even execute peasants on her land without ever facing a trial. To accuse her was to risk your life. 2. Disposable victims. Most of her victims were peasant servants, orphaned girls, farmhands. In a feudal society, these lives had no legal value. They were property, not people. When one went missing, it was like losing a goat. Tragic, maybe, but not worth a war. No one sent search parties, no one lit candles, no one asked questions, because no one believed those lives mattered. The psychology of silence. Even the people who knew stayed quiet. Servants scrubbed blood from walls with trembling hands. Villagers whispered horror stories over firelight, then shut up at dawn. Priests accepted bribes and offered blessings over empty graves. Local officials looked the other way for sacks of grain and favors in court. Elizabeth didn't silence people by force alone. She did it with economics. In a world of hunger and plague, silence was for sale, and she could pay in gold, land, or mercy. What if you saw too much? A few people tried to escape. One servant girl fled in winter, barefoot, bleeding. She made it 2 villages away before she was dragged back. They found her nailed to a chair in the cellar, still alive. She didn't last long. A priest raised suspicions after conducting too many quiet funerals. A month later, his church burned to the ground. He disappeared. A stable boy refused to clean blood from the torture room. Days later, he was kicked to death by a horse. Or so the story went. In Elizabeth's domain, the cost of disobedience wasn't punishment, it was erasure. The perfection of evil. This wasn't madness, it was meticulous. Elizabeth kept diaries, drawings of her methods, records of each girl's name, age, and the results of their deaths, even notes on which methods produced the most blood. It was clinical, like a scientist testing a formula. She believed blood could stop time, so she experimented. Boiled blood, fresh blood, blood from virgins, blood taken slowly versus violently. This was no longer a belief, it was an obsession, with data. Society enabled her. The truth is, Elizabeth didn't kill 650 girls by herself. She had help, but more than that, she had permission. Not explicit, but societal. Because the system she lived in, feudalism, was built on hierarchy, fear, and dehumanization. The poor were expendable, the noble were sacred, women were property. Elizabeth exploited this world perfectly. She played the role of the elegant hostess by day, and the vampire by night. The beginning of the end. By 1609, the disappearances had grown harder to hide. Peasants began refusing to send daughters to the castle. Even bribes didn't work anymore. So Elizabeth made a fatal error. She started killing nobles. Young daughters of minor aristocrats were lured to the castle under the promise of education, etiquette, and noble company. But they never came home. Unlike peasants, these girls had families with power, letters, and names. They had fathers in parliament, cousins in the royal court, and that would be her undoing. The cost of her empire. By the time the whispers reached the ears of King Matthias II, the damage was done. Elizabeth Bathory's empire had left behind hundreds of missing girls, dozens of mass graves, rooms soaked in blood, a society complicit in every drop. For 6 years, death ruled Chaktis Castle, and no one dared speak, not because they didn't know, but because they did and were too afraid to say it out loud. The empire of silence wasn't a fluke, it was a design, built on power, sustained by fear, and shattered only when she killed the wrong girl. Part 4, The Fall When Blood Touched Blue. She could kill peasants, she could kill servants, but when she touched the daughters of nobility, the silence shattered. For years, Elizabeth Bathory's crimes went unpunished. Not because they were hidden, but because her victims were invisible. Peasant girls, orphans, servants. They vanished quietly, but by 1609, that well had dried. Fear was spreading. Villagers stopped sending their daughters. Even bribes didn't work anymore. So Elizabeth made a fatal decision, a desperate, arrogant, suicidal move. She turned her hunger toward the daughters of nobles. Young aristocratic girls, well-bred, well-named, and well-connected, began disappearing after being invited to Castle Chaktis. Elizabeth offered them education, etiquette lessons, a future at court. What she really offered was a bloodbath. The girl who vanished in silk. Her name was Anna, 16, the daughter of a minor noble family, distantly related to Elizabeth herself. She had bright eyes, a quick laugh, and a future. She was sent to the castle to refine her manners. She never came back, but this time her parents asked questions. When letters from Anna stopped coming, her mother rode to Castle Chaktis herself. Elizabeth greeted her with a smile. gracious, elegant, cordial. "I miss Anna terribly," she said. "She ran off with a boy, I'm afraid." It would have worked, again, if the Countess hadn't made one mistake. She was wearing Anna's necklace, a family heirloom. One of a kind, too distinct to be mistaken. Anna's mother left the castle and went straight to the court. The king's opportunity. King Matthias II of Hungary wasn't just a ruler, he was a politician with a long memory and deeper debts. Elizabeth's family, the Bathories, had once bankrolled the crown during war. Now she was a wealthy widow with vast estates, no living husband, no male heirs, and the crown owed her money. What better way to cancel the debt than to prove she was a murderer? Matthias smelled opportunity and blood. He appointed the one man who could get close, György Thurzó, Palatine of Hungary, trusted noble, loyal cousin of Elizabeth's dead husband, and a man with a personal interest in reclaiming her land. The investigation begins. Thurzó began quietly. Whispers, interviews, clergy, servants. What he uncovered shocked even him. Mothers who had buried daughters in secret. Servants with scars they refused to explain. Officials who admitted they'd been paid to stay quiet. And the ledger, Elizabeth's meticulous journal chronicling names, dates, methods, and quantities of blood collected. It wasn't rumor anymore. It was evidence. But to arrest a countess, Thurzó needed irrefutable proof. And so, he planned a raid. The night the castle bled, December 29th, 1610, a cold dawn at Castle Chactich, mist crawling up the hills, snow clinging to the windows. Inside, silence. Thurzó arrived with soldiers, quietly, swiftly. No warning. They entered through the servants' gate. They didn't need to search far. In the first chamber, 2 girls, freshly killed, blood still warm. In the second, a torture room, walls blackened with smoke, floors slick with blood. In the third, Elizabeth's bath, filled with thick, dark liquid, still steaming. Elizabeth herself was found sitting calmly in her chamber, her hands crimson, her gown soaked. She smiled. "You're early," she said. The documents of hell among the most damning discoveries. A list of over 600 names, handwritten, believed to be victims. Sketches of torture devices, custom-made, optimized for extraction. Letters to nobility inviting daughters to refined instruction. And the diary. Passages written in a shaking hand, detailing theories on blood potency. The blood of a virgin, taken under fear, lasts longer in the cheeks. Warm blood applied within 10 minutes of death offers best results. The lower classes lack vitality, noble blood is richer. It was more than madness. It was science, twisted, ritualized, weaponized. Why she was never tried. Here's where history takes a turn most people don't expect. Elizabeth Bathory was never put on trial. Why? Because putting a countess on trial meant opening the door for others. The king feared a noble backlash. He needed a solution that punished her, but didn't threaten the entire aristocracy. So they reached a compromise. Her accomplices would face justice. She would disappear. Bricked alive in 1611, Elizabeth Bathory was walled inside her own tower. Not metaphorically, physically. The doors were bricked shut, windows barred, a slot left for food, another for waste. 3 rooms. No escape, no visitors. She would live the rest of her days in silence. The woman who silenced hundreds would now hear only her own voice. The full, complete Elizabeth survived nearly 4 years in that tomb of stone. She talked to ghosts, argued with shadows, stared for hours into a hand mirror, watching her beauty rot. She died on August 21st, 1614, alone in her bed. No screams, no blood, no youth left to steal. A woman who tried to conquer death finally succumbed to it. Part 5, Immortal, the Blood Countess in Legend and Lies. She died in a stone tomb, but her name lives on, in fear, in fiction, and in the monsters we still create. The body is dead. The myth is born. August 21st, 1614. Elizabeth Bathory, dead at 54, alone, forgotten, bricked into oblivion. But as her corpse decayed inside Chactich Castle, something else began to rise. Not her spirit, but her legend. What began as whispered rumors soon spread like wildfire across Europe. A countess who bathed in blood, a noblewoman who hunted virgins, a witch who drank youth straight from the veins of the innocent. It no longer mattered what was true. The world had found its monster. The story spreads and grows. Within a generation, Elizabeth Bathory was no longer just a criminal. She had become a fairy tale, a warning, a dark mirror held up to women in power, beauty, and ambition. Writers twisted the facts. The number of victims grew from 80 to 300, then 650. The torture became more elaborate: cages of spikes, iron maidens, blood showers. The countess became a vampire, a demon, a seductress from hell. In the centuries that followed, Elizabeth's image evolved with each retelling. 1700s. Folklore turned her into a night witch. 1800s. Gothic literature made her a blood-drinking temptress. 1900s. She appeared in horror novels and pulp magazines. 2000s. She became an icon, appearing in video games, movies, heavy metal lyrics, and fashion lines. The Vampire Connection. Centuries after her death, Elizabeth Bathory was reborn as a female Dracula. Not just a killer, but a creature of the night. Why? Because her story fit too perfectly. Noble lineage, a remote, terrifying castle, obsession with blood and youth, a seductive, aristocratic aura. Bram Stoker never mentioned her directly in Dracula, but scholars agree she haunts the pages. Modern vampire lore owes as much to the Blood Countess as it does to any Transylvanian prince. She was the original, the beautiful butcher, the ageless killer, the woman who wouldn't rot. From horror to pop icon. Ironically, the woman who murdered to stay young has achieved eternal youth through culture. She's been portrayed by Delphine LaLaurie in American Horror Story, Lady Gaga's Countess in Hotel, countless Gothic models, anime characters, and vampires with high cheekbones and cold stares. Her name is whispered in lyrics, fashion shows, perfumes. She's become a symbol of power and vanity, a cautionary tale, a feminist anti-hero, and to some, shockingly, a style icon. What started in blood has ended in branding. But what is the truth? Historians now try to peel back the legend. Some believe Elizabeth was a victim of political conspiracy. After all, the king owed her money. She was a powerful woman without a husband. The witnesses were tortured. The documents might have been faked. Could she have been framed? A misunderstood woman in a patriarchal age? Or a sadist protected for too long? The truth lies somewhere between. She may not have killed 650 girls, but she killed enough to earn her place in infamy. Her legacy and our reflection. Why do we keep returning to Elizabeth Bathory? Because she reveals something uncomfortable. That evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it wears perfume, dresses in silk, and smiles from behind a jeweled mirror. We're fascinated by her because we fear aging, we crave beauty, we flirt with power. Elizabeth Bathory is more than a historical figure. She's a projection of our darkest desires, our cultural obsessions, our hidden rage. In every retelling, we see a different face, but always, we see ourselves. The blood is gone, the whispers remain. Chactich Castle still stands, crumbling, haunted, and avoided by locals. They say, on winter nights, when the wind is just right, you can hear the blood dripping through stone. Or a woman whispering to her mirror, just one more drop, and I'll be young again. Epilogue. Her story is not just about the past, it is about power, obsession, and the terrible things we'll do to stay beautiful. The Blood Countess is dead, but her shadow still walks among us. Part 6. Legacy of a Mad God. What the Blood Countess still teaches us. The screams have faded, the blood has dried, but the lesson still drips beneath our skin. The monster was human. Elizabeth Bathory was not a vampire, not a witch, not some mythical fiend born from shadow and superstition. She was flesh and blood, a noblewoman, a wife, a mother, a human being. And that is what makes her story so terrifying. Because her evil didn't come from magic, it came from power, from vanity, from a society that protected the privileged and punished the poor. The psychology of a killer. Modern psychologists would likely diagnose Elizabeth with narcissistic personality disorder, an obsession with youth, admiration, and control. Psychopathy, marked by lack of empathy, manipulative charm, and sadism. Delusional thinking, the belief that blood could literally reverse aging. But these conditions alone don't make a killer. What allowed her madness to thrive was unchecked power. In her world, a noblewoman's will was law. Her castle was a kingdom. Her servants were bodies, disposable and silent. There were no cameras, no press, no courts that dared challenge her. And so, she became her own god. Power without accountability. Elizabeth didn't act alone. She had enablers, servants who followed her orders out of fear or loyalty, officials who took bribes to ignore the missing girls, nobles who whispered but never intervened. Her crimes thrived in the silence. It wasn't just one woman's cruelty, it was an entire system that looked away. And that's the darkest part. Evil doesn't need fangs, it only needs permission. A mirror to our obsessions. Why do we still tell her story? Because we still live it in different forms. We chase youth with injections, filters, and surgeries. We celebrate beauty and status over empathy and wisdom. We let powerful people exploit the weak, as long as it happens quietly. Elizabeth bathed in blood. Today we drown in likes, lies, and illusions. Her madness was extreme. But it was born from desires we all know: to stay young, to feel powerful, to be admired, no matter the cost. The difference between a killer and a consumer is often just context, and how far we're willing to go. The price of silence. Elizabeth's castle wasn't just made of stone, it was built from silence. The silence of girls too scared to scream. The silence of peasants too poor to fight back. The silence of institutions that protected names over lives, and silence is still the most dangerous accomplice of all. Every time we ignore abuse, every time we excuse cruelty because someone is rich, talented, or famous, we lay another brick in the kind of prison that Elizabeth ruled. Death was not the end. She died in 1614. But her legacy lives in every dictator who silences truth, abuser who hides behind fame, system that values power over people. Her story reminds us monsters don't just rise from the grave, they rise from power without empathy. And they often wear perfume. So what do we do with her story? We don't need more horror. We need more awareness. Remember the victims, not just the villain. Question systems that shield the powerful. Teach empathy as a strength, not a weakness. Understand that history repeats when we fail to learn from it. In the end, Elizabeth Bathory tried to escape death by stealing youth. But what she left behind is a lesson about what it means to be human. That we are all capable of darkness, but also of light. That we must choose again and again to resist cruelty. To speak when others are silent. To see the value in every life. Her beauty faded, her castle crumbled, her legend lives on. But let it live as a warning, not a myth, not a brand, not a monster to admire, but a mirror to avoid becoming. The Blood Countess is gone, but what we do with her memory is up to us.